The flight line at Yokosuka Naval Base stretched across the horizon like a concrete river, its surface shimmering with heat distortion, despite the early afternoon sun. Valentina walked toward her aircraft with the measured pace of someone who understood that the next few hours would either validate years of preparation or expose fatal flaws in techniques she had pioneered in the crucible of combat. The modified F-35C Lightning II sat in its designated hardstand, surrounded by technicians performing final systems checks with the meticulous attention that classified operations demanded. From a distance, the aircraft looked identical to any other Lightning II in the fleet, but closer inspection revealed subtle modifications that spoke of capabilities beyond conventional warfare. The airframe's surface exhibited a subtle prismatic quality, as if the stealth coating had been infused with materials that bent light in ways that seemed to violate physics. Sensor arrays had been integrated so seamlessly into the aircraft's skin that they appeared to be natural extensions of the original design. Most significantly, the aircraft's electronic systems hummed with a frequency that seemed to resonate in harmonics just below the threshold of human hearing. Chief Petty Officer Martinez emerged from beneath the aircraft, his weathered hands still clutching diagnostic equipment that registered systems most pilots had never heard of. At 52, Martinez had overseen more black-budget aircraft modifications than anyone currently serving in the Pacific Fleet. His approval was worth more than a dozen official certifications. "Ghost protocol systems are showing green across the board, Captain," he reported, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had spent the past 6 months integrating experimental technology into operational hardware. "The electromagnetic signature manipulation system is responding within acceptable parameters, and the adaptive stealth coating is maintaining molecular stability despite the ambient temperature variations." Valentina approached the aircraft with the reverence reserved for machines that represented the intersection of human ingenuity and strategic necessity. Her pre-flight inspection was more comprehensive than standard protocol required. But then again, standard protocol didn't cover aircraft that could reshape their radar signatures in real time. "Chief Martinez, what's the status on the backup systems?" she asked, running her hand along the aircraft's modified wing surface. The material felt warm to the touch, as if the metamaterials were already responding to electromagnetic input from the surrounding environment. "All redundancies are operational, ma'am. If the primary Ghost protocol system experiences failure, you'll have manual control over basic signature modification. Won't be as sophisticated as the automated system, but it'll keep you invisible to conventional radar." She nodded, appreciating the attention to detail that separated successful operations from catastrophic failures. "And the sensor packages?" "Fully integrated and tested, Captain. The quantum surveillance array will begin data collection the moment you enter contested airspace, and the electromagnetic mapping system will provide real-time analysis of any defensive systems you encounter." Lieutenant Commander Morrison approached from across the flight line, having been drawn by professional curiosity to witness the final preparations for a mission that had redefined his understanding of modern aerial warfare. "Captain Reyes," he called out, maintaining respectful distance from the classified aircraft modifications. "I wanted to wish you good luck, though I suspect luck has very little to do with what you're about to attempt." Valentina turned from her inspection, nodding the genuine concern in Morrison's weathered features. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander, but you're right about luck. It's the one variable I can't control, so I don't plan for it." "What do you plan for?" "Everything else." The simplicity of her answer masked the complexity of preparation that had consumed the past 72 hours. Mission planning for Operation Nightfall had required coordination between intelligence agencies, weather forecasting services, and electronic warfare specialists whose expertise existed at the intersection of physics and warfare. The Tactical Operations Center buzzed with controlled activity as 43 pilots took their positions at monitoring stations, equipped with displays that would track Operation Nightfall in real time. The room represented the nerve center of American naval aviation in the Pacific, where decisions affecting global strategic balance were made with the calm precision of chess masters contemplating moves that would influence games played years in the future. Admiral Castellano stood at the central command station, her attention focused on multiple data streams that painted a comprehensive picture of the operational environment. Satellite imagery showed weather patterns over the target area. Communication intercepts revealed Chinese military radio traffic following predictable patterns. Most importantly, the electromagnetic signature analysis confirmed that the Dragon's Breath quantum radar system remained operational and actively scanning for threats. All stations report ready for Operation Nightfall, announced Commander Hayes, his voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had characterized the morning's briefing. The transformation in his demeanor reflected the realization that he was witnessing something unprecedented in naval aviation history. "Ghost Lead, this is Yokosuka Control," came the voice from the Flight Operations Center. "You are cleared for taxi and departure. Winds are 270 at 8 knots, sealing unlimited visibility greater than 10 miles. Valentina's response came through the communication system with professional calm. "Yokosuka Control, Ghost Lead copies, taxiing to runway 27 for departure." On the tactical display, a blue icon representing her aircraft began moving across the digital representation of the airfield. The pilots in the operations center watched with the focused attention of professionals observing someone attempt something they understood to be theoretically possible but practically unprecedented. Lieutenant Commander Morrison found himself studying the mission timeline displayed on the central screen. The complexity was staggering: precise navigation through multiple radar zones, coordination with supporting assets, and electronic warfare techniques that would be executed while flying at combat speeds through some of the most contested airspace on Earth. "Admiral," he said quietly, "what happens if Captain Reyes encounters Chinese interceptors during the mission?" Admiral Castellanos didn't take her eyes off the tactical display, but her voice carried the weight of someone who had considered every contingency. "Lieutenant Commander, if Captain Reyes encounters Chinese interceptors, it means her stealth techniques have failed, and we're potentially looking at an international incident that could escalate into armed conflict." The gravity of that possibility settled over the operations center, like morning fog rolling across the flight deck. "However," Admiral Castellanos continued, "based on Captain Reyes's track record and the capabilities of the aircraft she's flying, the probability of detection by enemy aircraft is significantly lower than the probability of detection by ground-based systems. And the probability of detection by ground-based systems is what we're betting our strategic position in the Pacific on." Major Patterson, monitoring electronic warfare signatures from his station, looked up with concern. "Admiral, I'm showing increased Chinese radar activity along the projected flight path. Looks like they're conducting some kind of defensive exercise." Admiral Castellanos moved to Patterson's station, studying the electromagnetic signature patterns with the expertise of someone who had spent decades interpreting the electronic battlefield. "What kind of patterns are you seeing, Major?" "Multiple radar sites conducting coordinated sweeps, ma'am. Looks like they're testing overlapping coverage zones and response times, almost like they're expecting something." The implications sent a chill through the operations center. If the Chinese were conducting defensive exercises along Valentina's planned route, it could mean their intelligence services had detected preparations for Operation Nightfall. "Ghost Lead, this is Yokosuka Control," Admiral Castellanos spoke directly into the communication system. "Be advised that target area is showing increased defensive activity. Maintain mission profile unless advised otherwise. Valentina's response came immediately, her voice steady despite the changing tactical situation. Yokosuka Control, Ghost Lead copies increased activity. Mission profile remains optimal for current conditions. The modified F-35C Lightning II lifted off runway 27 with the fluid grace of an aircraft designed to disappear into the sky itself. Valentina felt the familiar sensation of the aircraft responding to her inputs, but there was something different about this flight, a subtle harmony between pilot and machine that came from months of testing experimental systems in environments that pushed both human reflexes and mechanical tolerances to their absolute limits. As she climbed through 10,000 feet, the Ghost protocol systems activated automatically, beginning the complex process of analyzing electromagnetic signatures in the surrounding airspace. The aircraft's adaptive stealth coating shifted its molecular structure in response to radar emissions from ground-based installations, creating a signature so subtle that it would barely register above background radiation levels. Ghost Lead, you are cleared to switch to tactical frequency, came the instruction from Yokosuka Control. Good hunting. Valentina switched her communication system to the encrypted channel that would connect her to the Tactical Operations Center for the duration of the mission. The voices of 43 fellow pilots would be her only human contact for the next 4 hours, voices that represented both professional oversight and moral support from colleagues who now understood the magnitude of what she was attempting. Tactical Control, Ghost Lead is airborne and proceeding to Waypoint Alpha, she reported, her voice calm despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. Ghost protocol systems are active and responding normally. From the Tactical Operations Center, Admiral Castellanos monitored the mission's progress on displays that showed information no enemy intelligence service had ever seen. The Ghost protocol system was working exactly as designed, creating electromagnetic signatures that shifted and morphed in response to the radar environment. Ghost Lead, this is Admiral Castellanos. Your signature is showing nominal on all monitoring systems. You are effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. The technical achievement was staggering, but Valentina knew that the real test would come when she entered the heavily defended airspace surrounding the Chinese installation. Quantum radar systems operated on principles that made conventional stealth techniques obsolete, requiring countermeasures that existed at the theoretical limits of current technology. Approaching Waypoint Alpha, she reported, noting the subtle changes in her aircraft's behavior as the Ghost protocol system adjusted to new electromagnetic conditions. Beginning descent to operational altitude. The descent took her through cloud layers that provided natural concealment, while the aircraft's systems analyzed the radar environment ahead. Each sweep of Chinese defensive radars provided data that helped refine the deception signatures the Ghost protocol would employ during the crucial penetration phase. Lieutenant Commander Morrison watched the tactical display with fascination and growing respect. The blue icon representing Valentina's aircraft was approaching the edge of contested airspace, but her radar signature was so subtle that it barely registered on their own monitoring equipment. "Admiral," he said quietly, "I'm beginning to understand why you were so confident about Captain Reyes' capabilities. What she's doing out there, it's not just flying. It's applied physics combined with tactical artistry." Admiral Castellanos nodded, never taking her eyes off the mission display. "Lieutenant Commander, what you're witnessing is the evolution of aerial warfare. Captain Reyes isn't just using the aircraft. She's conducting an orchestra of electromagnetic signatures, atmospheric conditions, and human psychology to create an illusion that exists in 4 dimensions. 4 dimensions. Length, width, height, and time. The deception has to be spatially convincing, but it also has to evolve temporally in ways that match the target she's mimicking. A flock of birds doesn't just look like birds on radar. It behaves like birds, moves like birds, responds to environmental conditions like birds. The South China Sea stretched beneath Valentina's aircraft like a vast mirror reflecting the afternoon sky, its surface broken only by the occasional merchant vessel following shipping lanes that had remained unchanged for centuries. At 28,000 feet, she flew through airspace that existed in the gray area between international law and national sovereignty claims, where the wrong decision could trigger diplomatic crises or military confrontations. Tactical control, Ghost Lead is approaching the Dragon's corridor, she reported, her voice maintaining professional calm despite the fact that she was about to attempt something that had never been successfully executed in operational conditions. Chinese radar activity is consistent with intelligence projections. The electromagnetic spectrum around her aircraft had become a complex symphony of radar emissions, communication signals, and electronic warfare systems, all operating in the narrow bands that defined modern military operations. The Ghost Protocol system analyzed each signal, building a real-time map of the defensive systems she would need to evade. Ghost Lead, this is tactical control, came Admiral Castellanos' voice through the encrypted communication channel. You are approaching the point of no return. Final systems check before penetration. Valentina ran through her checklist with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 14 years of military aviation. The Ghost Protocol system showed green across all parameters. The quantum surveillance array was ready to begin data collection. Most importantly, her aircraft's electromagnetic signature had been adjusted to match the delayed cargo flight from Bangkok that provided her operational cover. All systems nominal, tactical control. Ghost Lead is ready for penetration. The moment she crossed into disputed airspace, every assumption about modern aerial warfare would be tested against an enemy defensive system that represented the cutting edge of military technology. The Dragon's Breath quantum radar array was designed to detect aircraft that didn't exist, to track targets that shouldn't be trackable, to render obsolete the stealth technologies that had defined American air superiority for the past 3 decades. From the Tactical Operations Center, 43 pilots watched as the blue icon representing their colleague approached the red zone that marked the beginning of the most sophisticated defensive network ever deployed in the Pacific Theater. Ghost Lead, you are entering contested airspace, Admiral Castellanos announced unnecessarily. Execute mission profile at your discretion. Valentina's response came immediately, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Tactical control, Ghost Lead is going dark. We'll report at waypoint Bravo. The communication channel fell silent as Valentina switched to complete electronic silence, becoming truly invisible to everyone, allies and enemies alike. For the next 90 minutes, her only companions would be the stars above and the sea below, while she navigated through defensive systems that could detect stealth aircraft at ranges that made conventional evasion impossible. Lieutenant Commander Morrison found himself holding his breath, realizing that he was witnessing either the most significant advancement in aerial warfare since the development of radar, or the beginning of a catastrophic international incident that could reshape the strategic balance of power in the Pacific. Admiral, he said quietly, how will we know if she succeeds? Admiral Castellanos didn't take her eyes off the tactical display, where the blue icon had disappeared into a red zone that represented the unknown. Lieutenant Commander, if Captain Reyes succeeds, we'll know because she'll reappear at waypoint Bravo in 93 minutes with intelligence data that could prevent the next war from ever starting. And if she doesn't succeed, then we'll know because the entire Chinese South Sea Fleet will go to general quarters, and we'll be explaining to the President why we have a missing aircraft in disputed airspace during the most delicate diplomatic period in recent history. The operations center fell silent, 43 pairs of eyes focused on displays that showed nothing but empty sky, where moments before they had tracked one of the most advanced aircraft ever built. 93 minutes stretched like an eternity in the Tactical Operations Center, where the silence had grown so complete that the ambient hum of electronic systems seemed as loud as aircraft engines. Admiral Castellanos remained at her command station, her attention fixed on displays that showed Chinese military communications, radar emissions, and fleet movements throughout the South China Sea region. The waiting was the hardest part of any military operation, but it was particularly excruciating when success or failure would be measured not by what happened, but by what didn't happen. If Operation Nightfall succeeded, the Chinese would never know they had been penetrated. If it failed, the consequences could escalate beyond anyone's ability to control. Lieutenant Commander Morrison found himself studying the mission timeline displayed on the central screen, calculating and recalculating the distances involved, the speeds required, the margins for error that separated success from disaster. The mathematics were straightforward, but the variables involved in penetrating advanced defensive systems while maintaining perfect operational security were beyond traditional calculation. "Admiral," Major Patterson called out from his electronic warfare monitoring station, "I'm seeing some unusual patterns in Chinese communication traffic. Nothing that suggests alarm, but there's definitely increased coordination between their radar installations." Admiral Castellanos moved to Patterson Station, studying the intercept data with the expertise of someone who had spent decades interpreting enemy communications. The patterns showed increased activity, but not the kind of frantic coordination that would indicate a detected penetration. "What kind of coordination, Major?" "Looks like routine calibration procedures, ma'am. They're synchronizing their radar systems and conducting what appears to be standard maintenance protocols. But the timing seems coincidental with Captain Reyes' mission window." The implications were troubling but not necessarily catastrophic. Routine maintenance could provide additional cover for Valentina's penetration, but it could also mean that the defensive systems were operating at peak efficiency during the most critical phase of her mission. "Any change in their fleet movements?" Admiral Castellanos asked. "Negative, ma'am. All Chinese naval assets are maintaining routine patrol patterns. No signs of increased readiness or deployment modifications." The absence of alarm was encouraging, but 43 pilots understood that the most dangerous military operations were often those that proceeded exactly according to plan right up until the moment when everything went catastrophically wrong. Captain Rodriguez, monitoring satellite imagery from his station, looked up with concern. "Admiral, I'm showing some weather development over the target area. Nothing that should affect the mission, but there's a storm system building about 50 miles east of Captain Reyes' planned route." Admiral Castellanos studied the meteorological data, noting the storm's projected path and intensity. Weather could be either an asset or a liability, depending on how it affected radar propagation and aircraft performance. "Will the storm system interfere with the Dragon's Breath radar array?" she asked. "Unknown, ma'am. Quantum radar systems are supposed to be immune to atmospheric interference, but we don't have enough operational data to confirm that under all conditions." The uncertainty was frustrating but not surprising. Operation Nightfall was, by definition, an intelligence-gathering mission designed to answer questions about capabilities that remained largely theoretical. 87 minutes elapsed, then 88, 89. The tension in the operations center had reached the point where 43 combat veterans found themselves unconsciously holding their breath, waiting for either the relief of successful extraction or the alarm bells that would signal international crisis. 90 minutes. 91. 92. "Admiral," the communications operator announced suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, I have contact with Ghost Lead on the extraction frequency. Every head in the operations center turned toward the communications station as Valentina's voice came through the speakers with professional calm that masked whatever she had experienced during the past 93 minutes. Tactical control, Ghost Lead reporting successful completion of primary mission objectives. Package is secure and extraction is proceeding normally. The collective exhale in the Tactical Operations Center was audible as 43 pilots released breath they hadn't realized they were holding. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, but Admiral Castellanos remained focused on the operational requirements that would bring Valentina home safely. Ghost Lead, Tactical Control copies successful mission completion, she responded, her voice maintaining the same professional calm despite the significance of what had just been achieved. What is your current status and position? Tactical Control, Ghost Lead is at Waypoint Bravo, all systems nominal, package intact and secured. The Dragon's breath system performed exactly as intelligence projections suggested, but there were some interesting variations that will require detailed debriefing. The tantalizing hint of unexpected discoveries sent a ripple of anticipation through the operations center. Intelligence gathering missions were designed to answer specific questions, but the most valuable operations often uncovered information that no one had thought to ask about. Copy that, Ghost Lead. You are cleared for return flight via Route Charlie. Expected arrival time is 1647 hours local. Tactical Control, Ghost Lead copies Route Charlie with arrival at 1647. Be advised that I encountered some atmospheric anomalies during the mission that may have affected sensor readings. We'll need technical debrief with the quantum analysis team. Lieutenant Commander Morrison leaned forward in his chair, professional curiosity, overriding his relief at Valentina's successful extraction. Admiral, what kind of atmospheric anomalies could affect quantum sensor readings? Admiral Castellanos was wondering the same thing, but she understood that detailed discussions would have to wait until Valentina was safely back on deck. Ghost Lead will have the full technical team standing by for immediate debrief upon your return. Priority 1 classification protocols are in effect. Copy that, Tactical Control. Ghost Lead is proceeding home. The blue icon representing Valentina's aircraft reappeared on the tactical display, following the prescribed route back toward Yokosuka Naval Base. But something was different about the aircraft's signature. Subtle variations that suggested the Ghost protocol system had been modified or adapted based on whatever she had encountered during the penetration phase. Major Patterson studied the electronic warfare data streaming from the aircraft's sensors. Admiral, I'm seeing some unusual electromagnetic signatures from Ghost Lead's aircraft. The stealth system appears to be operating in a configuration that's not in any of our technical manuals. What kind of configuration, Major? It's like the aircraft is mimicking multiple targets simultaneously. The radar signature is showing characteristics of at least 3 different aircraft types, all occupying the same approximate position, but with slightly different electromagnetic profiles. The implications were staggering. If Valentina had discovered a way to create multiple false targets from a single aircraft platform, the tactical applications would revolutionize electronic warfare. Ghost Lead, this is Admiral Castellanos. Can you provide any preliminary assessment of the modifications you made to the Ghost protocol system? Valentina's response came after a pause that suggested she was choosing her words carefully. Admiral, during the penetration phase, I discovered that the Dragon's breath system responds to quantum entanglement signatures in ways that our simulations didn't predict. I had to adapt the Ghost protocol to exploit those characteristics. Can you elaborate, Captain? Ma'am, I'd prefer to discuss the technical details during debrief, but I can confirm that the enemy's quantum radar system has vulnerabilities that we didn't know existed. More importantly, the countermeasures I developed can be applied to conventional aircraft with relatively minor modifications. The silence that followed was filled with the implications of what she was suggesting. If the techniques Valentina had pioneered could be adapted to the broader fleet, American air superiority in the Pacific theater would be secured for the foreseeable future. Captain Rodriguez looked up from his monitoring station with amazement. Admiral, what Captain Reyes accomplished out there, it's going to change everything, isn't it? Admiral Castellanos nodded slowly, her mind already working through the strategic implications. Captain Rodriguez, what we witnessed today will be studied and analyzed for decades. Captain Reyes didn't just successfully penetrate enemy defenses. She discovered principles that could redefine the relationship between offense and defense in aerial warfare. The approach pattern for Yokosuka Naval Base had never seemed more welcoming to Valentina as she descended through 20,000 feet toward home. The familiar sight of aircraft carriers anchored in the harbor, the geometric precision of runway arrangements, and the controlled chaos of flight operations all represented the organized complexity of military aviation at its finest. Yokosuka approach, Ghost lead requesting vectors for recovery, she transmitted, following standard protocols despite the extraordinary nature of the mission she had just completed. Ghost lead, Yokosuka approach, radar contact. Turn left heading 270, descend and maintain 5,000. You are number 1 for recovery, cleared straight in approach runway 27. The priority handling was expected for a classified operation, but Valentina appreciated the efficiency that would minimize her exposure time in the traffic pattern. The sooner she was on deck, the sooner the technical teams could begin analyzing the intelligence she had gathered. As she configured the aircraft for landing, the Ghost protocol systems gradually powered down, returning the Lightning II to conventional stealth parameters. The experimental modifications had performed flawlessly, but the real test would come when engineers analyzed the sensor data and attempted to understand how quantum radar systems could be defeated using principles that had existed at the theoretical level just 6 hours earlier. Ghost lead, you are cleared to land runway 27. Wind is 280 at 6 knots. Yokosuka Tower, Ghost lead is cleared to land. The touchdown was smooth despite the aircraft carrying sensor packages and electronic warfare equipment that hadn't existed when the Lightning II was originally designed. The integration of experimental systems with operational hardware represented months of engineering work, compressed into impossible timeframes by the urgent requirements of Pacific theater intelligence gathering. As she taxied toward the designated hardstand, Valentina could see the reception committee waiting for her aircraft. Admiral Castellanos stood near the technical debriefing facility, surrounded by intelligence analysts, electronic warfare specialists, and engineers who represented the cutting edge of American military technology development. But it was the group of 43 pilots standing at attention near the flight line that drew her attention. The same aviators who had witnessed her exclusion from the morning's roll call now stood as honor guard for her return from a mission that had redefined their understanding of what was possible in modern aerial warfare. Ghost lead, contact ground control frequency 121.9 for taxi instructions to parking, came the final transmission from the control tower. Ground control, Ghost lead switching to your frequency. The familiar routine of post-flight procedures provided a sense of normalcy after 4 hours of operating at the absolute limits of human and technological capability. But as she shut down the aircraft systems and prepared for the comprehensive debriefing that would follow, Valentina understood that nothing would be normal again. The intelligence she had gathered would influence strategic decisions affecting global stability. The techniques she had pioneered would reshape training programs for the next generation of combat pilots. Most importantly, the proof of concept she had demonstrated would accelerate development programs that existed only in theoretical form just hours earlier. Chief Petty Officer Martinez approached the aircraft with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized his pre-flight preparations. "Welcome home, Captain," he called out as she prepared to climb down from the cockpit. "How did she perform out there?" Valentina paused at the top of the aircraft's ladder, looking back at the machine that had carried her through the most challenging mission of her career. "Chief Martinez, she performed like a ghost, silent, invisible, and absolutely deadly when she needed to be." The smile that crossed Martinez's weathered features spoke of professional satisfaction that transcended routine maintenance procedures. "That's what we built her for, ma'am. That's exactly what we built her for." The debriefing facility at Yokosuka Naval Base had been configured for maximum security and minimum distraction, its sterile walls lined with electronic shielding that prevented any electromagnetic emissions from escaping the classified environment. Valentina sat at the head of a conference table, surrounded by the most senior intelligence analysts, electronic warfare specialists, and operational planners in the Pacific Theater. Admiral Castellanos occupied the seat to her right, while a collection of technical experts filled the remaining chairs with the focused attention of people who understood they were about to learn information that could reshape modern warfare. The mood in the room was electric with anticipation, professional excitement barely contained beneath the surface of military protocol. "Captain Reyes," Admiral Castellanos began, "before we discuss the technical aspects of your mission, I want you to know that preliminary analysis of your sensor data has already exceeded our most optimistic projections. What you accomplish today will influence American strategic capabilities for decades to come." Valentina nodded acknowledgement, but her expression remained focused on the operational implications rather than personal recognition. "Thank you, Admiral. However, I think the most significant discoveries were unintentional. The Dragon's breath system revealed vulnerabilities that our theoretical models never predicted." Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the lead engineer for the Ghost Protocol Development Program, leaned forward with barely contained excitement. "Captain, can you walk us through the specific adaptations you made to the signature manipulation system?" "Dr. Chen, about 20 minutes into the penetration phase, I realized that the quantum radar was responding to my aircraft in ways that didn't match our simulations. Instead of seeing a single target with variable signatures, it was treating each signature variation as a separate entity occupying the same physical space." The implications sent a ripple of excitement through the assembled experts. If quantum radar systems couldn't distinguish between multiple signatures emanating from the same source, the tactical applications were revolutionary. "I adapted the Ghost protocol to exploit this characteristic," Valentina continued. "Instead of morphing from one signature to another, I began generating multiple signatures simultaneously. To the radar operators, it looked like a formation of aircraft flying in perfect synchronization." Colonel James Morrison, the senior intelligence analyst responsible for Chinese defensive capabilities assessment, studied the preliminary data with growing amazement. "Captain, according to these readings, you convinced their radar system that you were simultaneously a flock of migratory birds, a small civilian aircraft, and atmospheric interference from the approaching storm system." "That's correct, Colonel. The quantum entanglement principles that make their radar so effective also create processing ambiguities when presented with contradictory information. The human operators see multiple contacts in the same location and assume it's a system malfunction." Dr. Chen was frantically taking notes, her engineering mind already working through the technical modifications required to replicate Valentina's discoveries. "Captain, what kind of processing power did this technique require? And how did you manage the electromagnetic interference between multiple simultaneous signatures? Dr. Chen, that's where the human element became critical. The aircraft's computer systems could generate the signatures, but only human judgment could determine which combinations would be most effective based on environmental conditions, radar operator psychology, and tactical situation. Admiral Castellano studied the sensor data scrolling across the display screens. Captain Reyes, you're describing a level of electronic warfare sophistication that our enemies aren't prepared to counter. More importantly, you're describing techniques that can be taught to other pilots. With respect, Admiral, I'm not sure these techniques can be taught in the conventional sense. They require intuitive understanding of electromagnetic principles combined with real-time assessment of human psychology under combat conditions. It's more art than science. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled experts. They were dealing with capabilities that existed at the intersection of advanced technology and individual talent, making replication problematic despite the strategic advantages involved. The technical debriefing continued for 3 hours as Valentina walked the assembled experts through every aspect of Operation Nightfall, from the initial penetration of Chinese airspace to the final extraction procedures that had brought her home with intelligence data that exceeded all projections. The sensor packages had recorded electromagnetic signatures, communication intercepts, and radar system performance characteristics that would inform American strategic planning for years to come. The most significant discovery, Valentina explained, highlighting specific data points on the tactical display, wasn't about the Dragon's breath system itself, but about how quantum radar operators interpret conflicting information. They're trained to trust their technology absolutely, which creates cognitive blind spots that can be exploited. Dr. Chen studied the electromagnetic signature analysis with fascination. Captain, these readings suggest that you were able to create signature patterns that appeared to violate the laws of physics. How did the enemy operators respond to that? They ignored them, Valentina replied simply. When presented with sensor data that contradicts their understanding of reality, human operators tend to dismiss it as equipment malfunction rather than enemy action. I became a ghost not by disappearing, but by becoming impossible to believe. Colonel Morrison looked up from his intelligence assessment. Captain, this has implications far beyond electronic warfare. What you're describing is a psychological vulnerability that could be exploited across multiple domains of military operations. Admiral Castellanos had been silent for several minutes, processing the strategic implications of what she was hearing. Captain Reyes, I want you to understand the significance of what you've discovered. The techniques you pioneered today don't just provide tactical advantages. They restore American technological supremacy in contested environments that we thought we had lost. The weight of that statement settled over the debriefing room. For the past decade, American military planners had watched with growing concern as potential adversaries developed defensive capabilities that threatened to neutralize the technological advantages that had defined American military doctrine since the end of the Cold War. However, Admiral Castellanos continued, we now face a different challenge. How do we operationalize these discoveries? How do we train pilots to replicate what you accomplished through intuition and improvisation? Valentina considered the question carefully, understanding that her answer would influence training programs and operational doctrine for the next generation of combat aviators. Admiral, the silence in Briefing Room Alpha stretched like a taut wire, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights and the distant roar of F-35 Lightning IIs warming up on the tarmac. Captain Valentina Ghost, Reyes pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, invisible in the shadows, while 43 of her fellow pilots filled every seat in the amphitheater-style room. The morning sun slanted through the narrow windows, casting harsh geometric patterns across their flight suits, patterns that somehow managed to avoid touching her. Commander Hayes stood at the podium, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the classified mission brief displayed on the massive screen behind him. His voice carried the weight of 27 years in naval aviation as he began reading the roster for Operation Nightfall, the most critical sortie in the Pacific theater since the Korean conflict. Each name he called echoed off the walls with military precision, followed by the sharp response of "Present, sir." From pilots whose reputations had been forged in the crucible of carrier operations. Lieutenant Commander Morrison. "Present, sir." Major Patterson. "Present, sir." The roll call continued, each acknowledgement a drumbeat of anticipation. Valentina's fingers found the worn fabric of her flight suit where her wings gleamed dully in the artificial light. She'd earned those wings over the skis of Afghanistan, threading an A-10 Warthog through ground fire so dense it looked like angry fireworks, all to extract a downed reconnaissance team. The distinguished flying cross pinned to her chest felt heavier today, as if the metal itself understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Captain Rodriguez. "Present, sir." The names continued, alphabetically precise, but something was wrong. Valentina's mind raced through the roster she'd memorized. Peterson, Quinn, Ramirez. They were approaching her section of the alphabet, yet her name remained unspoken. Around the room, 43 heads remained forward-focused, but she caught the subtle glances, the barely perceptible shifts in posture. They knew. Everyone knew. "Captain Thompson." "Present, sir." Her jaw tightened. The exclusion felt deliberate, calculated. After 14 years of service, after proving herself in 3 combat theaters, after being handpicked for this classified operation just 72 hours ago, she was being erased from the mission that could define her career. The irony wasn't lost on her. They called her Ghost because of her ability to appear out of nowhere in the cockpit, to materialize behind enemy lines when least expected. Now, it seemed, they wanted her to disappear entirely. The briefing room's air recycling system kicked in with a mechanical wheeze, stirring the stale atmosphere thick with tension and the lingering scent of jet fuel that permeated everything on Yokosuka Naval Base. Valentina remained motionless, her dark eyes fixed on the mission parameters scrolling across the screen. High-value target. Contested airspace. Zero margin for error. Everything she'd trained for, everything she'd sacrificed for, reduced to a bureaucratic oversight. Commander Hayes reached the end of his list. 43 pilots, 43 responses, not 44. The mystery wasn't just why her name had been skipped. It was what came next that would change everything. The heavy oak door at the rear of the briefing room creaked open with the deliberate slowness of someone who knew every eye would turn in their direction. Rear Admiral Margaret Castellano stepped into the fluorescent-lit arena, her 4 stars catching the harsh light like captured lightning. At 62, she moved with the fluid precision of someone who had commanded carrier groups in 3 different oceans, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun that seemed to radiate authority. The room snapped to attention with military efficiency, 43 chairs scraping against concrete in near-perfect unison. But Admiral Castellanos wasn't looking at the seated pilots. Her steel-gray eyes swept the shadows along the wall until they found Valentina, still pressed against the cold concrete like a ghost made flesh. "As you were," the Admiral commanded, her voice carrying the weight of 3 decades in naval aviation. The pilots settled back into their seats, but the tension in the room had shifted, becoming something electric and dangerous. Commander Hayes stepped aside from the podium, confusion etched across his weathered features as he yielded the floor to his superior. Admiral Castellanos moved to the center of the briefing area, her polished shoes clicking against the floor with metronomic precision. The mission parameters still glowed on the screen behind her. A high-altitude reconnaissance run deep into disputed airspace, where Chinese J-20 stealth fighters had been conducting aggressive intercepts for the past month. Intelligence suggested they were testing response times, probing for weaknesses in the defensive perimeter around Taiwan. This sortie would send a clear message. American resolve remained unshakable. "Gentlemen," Admiral Castellanos began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled pilots before returning to the shadows where Valentina stood. "I see we have 43 volunteers for Operation Nightfall, 43 of our finest aviators, ready to thread the needle between diplomacy and warfare." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room like morning fog rolling across the flight deck. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant whine of jet engines and the subtle hum of air conditioning. Several pilots shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing something significant building in the charged atmosphere. "However," Admiral Castellanos continued, her voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute attention, "there seems to be a misunderstanding. Commander Hayes, when you compiled this roster, did you forget someone?" Commander Hayes cleared his throat, his eyes darting between his clipboard and the Admiral's unwavering stare. "Ma'am, all personnel assigned to Operation Nightfall are present and accounted for. 43 pilots, as requested by Pacific Fleet Command." 43, the Admiral repeated, nodding slowly. "That's an odd number for a formation flight, wouldn't you say? Rather, incomplete." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Valentina felt her heart rate increase, though her expression remained carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago to read the undercurrents in military hierarchies, to understand when power dynamics were shifting like tectonic plates beneath the surface. Admiral Castellanos turned her attention to the assembled pilots, her gaze moving from face to face with deliberate consideration. "Tell me, gentlemen, when you looked at your mission brief last night, did any of you notice something unusual about the flight formation?" Lieutenant Commander Morrison, a 20-year veteran with graying temples, raised his hand slightly. "Ma'am, the formation seemed unconventional. We're missing a crucial element for deep penetration reconnaissance." "Which element would that be, Lieutenant Commander?" "Electronic warfare support, ma'am. Someone with specialized experience in radar evasion and countermeasures." A knowing smile played at the corner of Admiral Castellanos' mouth. "Precisely. And where, I wonder, might we find such a pilot?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a flare, visible to everyone but understood by few. Admiral Castellanos' eyes moved deliberately to the shadows where Valentina stood, and suddenly the geometry of the room shifted. 43 heads turned in unison, following the Admiral's gaze until it landed on the pilot they had collectively managed not to see. "Captain Valentina Reyes," Admiral Castellanos announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. "Call sign Ghost, 14 years of distinguished service, 3 combat deployments, Purple Heart recipient, and holder of the Navy's only classified perfect score on the electronic warfare simulation known as the Phantom Protocol." Valentina pushed herself away from the wall, her movements fluid and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to finally find her, illuminating the collection of ribbons and medals on her flight suit that spoke of competence earned in the crucible of aerial combat. "Ma'am," she acknowledged, her voice steady and professional. "Captain Reyes," Admiral Castellanos continued, turning to address the room while keeping Valentina in her peripheral vision, "was handpicked for this operation by me personally. Not as an afterthought, not as a diversity checkbox, but because Operation Nightfall requires a very specific skill set that exists in perhaps 3 pilots currently active in the Pacific Fleet." She paused, letting that information settle over the assembled aviators like a heavy blanket. 2 of those pilots are currently recovering from injuries sustained in training accidents. The third is standing against that wall, having been inexplicably omitted from this morning's roll call. Commander Hayes's face had gone pale, the implications of his oversight beginning to crystallize. "Ma'am, I apologize. There must have been an administrative error. Admiral Castellanos raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. Commander Hayes, administrative errors don't happen at the flag officer level. They happen when people make assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. The words carried a weight that extended far beyond simple military protocol. In the silence that followed, Valentina could hear her own heartbeat, steady and strong, keeping time like a drumbeat in a ceremony she'd never expected to witness. Major Patterson, a pilot known for his precision in both flying and speaking, cleared his throat carefully. Admiral, with respect, what makes Captain Reyes uniquely qualified for this mission? It was a fair question, asked without malice, and Admiral Castellanos treated it as such. She moved to the mission display, gesturing to the complex flight path that would take them through some of the most contested airspace in the Pacific. Major Patterson, look at this route. See how it skirts the edge of Chinese territorial claims while maintaining our legal right to navigate international airspace. See these radar installations here, here, and here. She pointed to red markers scattered along their projected path. Each one represents a potential point of compromise. Each one could turn this reconnaissance mission into an international incident. Her finger traced the route with military precision. Captain Reyes doesn't just fly through contested airspace. She disappears into it. During her deployment in Afghanistan, she flew 17 missions behind enemy lines without being detected once. Not once. She earned the call sign Ghost not because she's invisible, but because she makes her aircraft invisible. The room had grown so quiet that Valentina could hear the subtle shift of fabric as pilots leaned forward, paying attention in a way they hadn't before. Admiral Castellanos moved to the tactical display, her fingers dancing across the touch screen interface with practiced efficiency. The mission parameters expanded, revealing layers of complexity that had been hidden during the initial briefing. Red zones marked known surface-to-air missile sites. Yellow corridors indicated optimal flight paths. Blue markers showed friendly assets positioned for support and extraction if needed. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice taking on the cadence of someone who had briefed countless operations, "what you're looking at is not a simple reconnaissance flight. This is a chess game played at Mach 1.8, where a single wrong move triggers World War III. She highlighted a section of the flight path that dove between two mountainous islands, creating a natural radar shadow that would hide aircraft from ground-based detection systems. Captain Reyes pioneered this technique during Operation Desert Mirage in 2019. Intelligence analysts called it impossible. She called it Tuesday. Lieutenant Commander Morrison studied the display with the intensity of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew. "Ma'am, the margin for error on this approach is non-existent." Valentina spoke for the first time since acknowledging the Admiral, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated impossible odds before. "Which is why it works. Conventional wisdom says to maintain safe altitude above these peaks. Conventional wisdom gets you painted by radar arrays positioned specifically to catch aircraft following conventional wisdom." The pilots in the room shifted, some leaning forward with genuine interest, others maintaining the skeptical postures of men who had seen too many briefings promising miracle solutions. Admiral Castellanos nodded approvingly. "Captain Reyes understands something that took me 20 years to learn. The most dangerous thing in modern warfare isn't enemy capabilities. It's predictability. The moment your enemy can predict your actions, you're already dead." She pulled up a classified after-action report, the text heavily redacted but the mission designation clearly visible. Operation Ghost Walk, Afghanistan, 2021. Captain Reyes was tasked with extracting a 3-man reconnaissance team that had been compromised behind enemy lines. The extraction zone was surrounded by Taliban forces with shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. Conventional wisdom said the mission was suicide. The screen displayed a grainy black and white image from a Predator drone, showing a barren mountainous landscape dotted with enemy positions. Small white shapes moved across the terrain, hostile forces converging on a target area. She went in anyway, Admiral Castellanos continued. Not because she was reckless, but because she understood something the mission planners had missed. The enemy was positioned to defend against a conventional extraction, helicopters coming in low and slow, fixed-wing aircraft maintaining safe standoff distances. Major Patterson found himself drawn into the tactical puzzle despite his earlier skepticism. What did she do differently? Valentina's eyes remained fixed on the display, but her voice carried the weight of memory. I came in fast and high, then dove straight down through their defensive perimeter. By the time they acquired me on their targeting systems, I was already below their minimum engagement envelope. Too close for missiles, too fast for small arms. The extraction was completed without a shot being fired, Admiral Castellanos confirmed. The reconnaissance team recovered critical intelligence that led to disrupting a planned attack on a NATO convoy. 17 soldiers went home to their families because Captain Reyes refused to accept that something was impossible. The briefing room had taken on a different energy, the initial skepticism giving way to professional curiosity and grudging respect. Admiral Castellanos advanced to the next slide, revealing a detailed intelligence assessment marked with the highest classification levels. Satellite imagery showed the disputed airspace they would be entering, a complex web of overlapping radar coverage, missile sites, and patrol routes that resembled a three-dimensional maze designed by someone with a sadistic understanding of aerial warfare. Operation Nightfall isn't just about gathering intelligence, she explained, her tone becoming more serious. We have reason to believe that Chinese forces are preparing to test a new air defense system, something that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Pacific. The implications settled over the room like a heavy fog. This wasn't a routine reconnaissance mission. It was potentially the opening move in a much larger strategic game. The system is code-named Dragon's Breath, Admiral Castellanos continued, highlighting a specific area of the map. Our assets suggest it's a quantum radar array capable of detecting stealth aircraft at ranges previously thought impossible. If operational, it would neutralize our technological advantage in the region. Captain Rodriguez, a veteran of multiple deployments, raised his hand. Ma'am, if this system is as advanced as intelligence suggests, how do we avoid detection? That, Captain Rodriguez, is where unconventional thinking becomes essential, the Admiral replied. Traditional stealth relies on aircraft design and electronic countermeasures. But there's another type of stealth, tactical stealth. The art of being where your enemy doesn't expect you to be when they don't expect you to be there. She gestured toward Valentina. Captain Reyes has spent the last 2 years working with DARPA on something called adaptive flight protocols. Instead of trying to hide from radar, you confuse it. You make it see what you want it to see. The tactical display shifted to show a computer simulation. Aircraft signatures appearing and disappearing, multiplying and converging, creating patterns that would be impossible for human operators to interpret in real time. It's not magic, Valentina interjected, sensing the skepticism still lingering in the room. It's applied physics combined with an understanding of how radar operators think. Human pattern recognition has limitations. You can exploit those limitations if you understand them well enough. Lieutenant Commander Morrison leaned forward, his engineering background drawing him into the technical challenge. You're talking about creating false targets. I'm talking about creating chaos, Valentina corrected. False targets are predictable once you understand the algorithm. Chaos is unpredictable by definition. Admiral Castellanos smiled, recognizing the moment when abstract concepts began clicking into place for her audience. During the classified testing phase, Captain Reyes successfully penetrated simulated defenses that had stopped every other pilot in the program, not by being invisible, but by being incomprehensible. The room had grown quiet again, but this time it was the quiet of focused attention rather than dismissive skepticism. These were professional aviators beginning to understand that they were witnessing something beyond routine military briefings. The Chinese expect us to probe their defenses, Admiral Castellanos continued. They're prepared for our best conventional tactics. They're not prepared for someone who doesn't follow conventional tactics because she helped write the new ones. Major Patterson studied the mission profile with renewed interest. Admiral, what's the specific objective of Operation Nightfall? Captain Reyes will penetrate their defensive perimeter, gather real-time intelligence on the Dragon's breath system, and, if the opportunity presents itself, test whether their new technology can actually detect the impossible. The weight of that statement settled over the assembled pilots. This wasn't just reconnaissance. It was a direct challenge to an enemy that believed they had achieved technological supremacy. Admiral Castellanos moved away from the tactical display, her attention shifting to something more fundamental than mission parameters or technical specifications. She studied the faces of the 43 pilots seated before her, reading the mixture of professional interest and lingering doubt that still clouded some expressions. "I want to address something that I suspect some of you are thinking," she began, her voice taking on a more personal tone without losing its authority. "Some of you are wondering why I'm making such a production of defending Captain Reyes's qualifications. Some of you might think this is about politics or quotas or proving some kind of point about women in combat." The silence in the room grew heavier, charged with the kind of tension that comes when unspoken thoughts are dragged into the light. "Let me be clear about something," Admiral Castellanos continued. "I have commanded carrier strike groups in 3 different theaters of operation. I have overseen missions where the margin between success and catastrophic failure was measured in seconds. I have sent young men and women into situations where their skill and judgment were the only thing standing between victory and disaster." Her eyes moved deliberately from pilot to pilot, making contact with each one in turn. "In that context, Captain Reyes isn't here because she's a woman. She's here despite the fact that being a woman in naval aviation means she's had to be twice as good to get half the recognition. She's here because when I need someone to do the impossible, I call the pilot who's already done it." Lieutenant Commander Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Admiral, I think most of us understand Captain Reyes's qualifications. The question is why this mission requires such specialized approaches." Admiral Castellanos nodded, appreciating the directness of the question. "Fair point, Lieutenant Commander. Let me show you something that's been classified until this morning." She pulled up a new display, satellite imagery dated just 48 hours earlier. The images showed a Chinese military installation on a disputed island, but something was wrong with the picture. The buildings seemed to shimmer, their outlines wavering as if viewed through heat distortion. "This is what quantum radar looks like when it's operational," Admiral Castellanos explained. "The electromagnetic field it generates is so intense that it interferes with standard surveillance satellites. We're essentially trying to gather intelligence on a weapon system that makes intelligence gathering impossible through conventional means." The implications began to sink in. This wasn't just about testing new technology. It was about maintaining the ability to gather critical intelligence in an environment where traditional methods had become obsolete. "Captain Reyes," Admiral Castellanos called out, "would you explain to your fellow pilots what happened during your last training flight?" Valentina stepped forward into the light, her movement drawing every eye in the room. "2 weeks ago, I flew a simulated penetration of the test facility at Area 51. The defensive array there is designed to replicate the most advanced threats we might face in the Pacific Theater." She paused, choosing her words carefully. I not only avoided detection by their quantum radar array, I convinced it that I was a flock of migratory birds heading south for the winter. A few pilots exchanged glances, unsure whether to be impressed or skeptical. The radar operators spent 3 hours trying to figure out why their multi-billion-dollar detection system was tracking geese at Mach 1.2, Valentina continued. By the time they realized what had happened, I had completed the entire reconnaissance profile and was back at base writing my after-action report. The room erupted in surprised murmurs and low whistles. These were pilots who understood the technical impossibility of what she was describing. Admiral Castellanos raised her hand, quieting the room as efficiently as she had commanded silence on aircraft carrier flight decks during live operations. The murmurs faded, but the energy in the briefing room had fundamentally shifted. What had begun as skeptical curiosity was evolving into something approaching professional respect. The technique Captain Reyes pioneered has a name, Admiral Castellanos continued, advancing to a new slide that showed complex waveform patterns and electromagnetic signatures. We call it signature morphing. Instead of trying to minimize your radar cross-section, you actively manipulate it to mimic something harmless. She gestured toward the display where various aircraft signatures were compared to natural phenomena, flocks of birds, weather patterns, atmospheric disturbances. The human brain is hardwired to dismiss certain patterns as non-threatening. Even highly trained radar operators will subconsciously filter out signatures that match their expectations of natural phenomena. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward, his tactical mind engaging with the concept. But ma'am, wouldn't this technique require real-time adjustment based on atmospheric conditions, wind patterns, even the time of day? Exactly, Valentina responded, stepping closer to the center of the room. It's not something you can program into an autopilot or execute by following a checklist. It requires intuitive understanding of how electromagnetic signatures behave in different environments, combined with the ability to make split-second adjustments based on feedback that most pilots would never even notice. Major Patterson, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke up. Captain Reyes, how do you learn something like that? I mean, conventional flight training doesn't exactly cover impersonating wildlife on radar screens. A slight smile played at the corner of Valentina's mouth. Major, have you ever hunted? The question caught him off guard. Yes, ma'am, deer hunting in Michigan with my father. Then you understand that successful hunting isn't about superior firepower or better equipment. It's about understanding how your prey thinks, how it moves, how it reacts to threats. You have to become invisible not just physically, but psychologically. The analogy resonated through the room. These were military professionals who understood the hunter-prey dynamic that defined modern warfare. Radar operators are human, Valentina continued. They have patterns of attention, cognitive biases, moments of fatigue. They expect threats to behave in certain ways because that's how threats have always behaved. But what if the threat doesn't behave like a threat? What if it behaves like something so mundane that their brain dismisses it automatically? Admiral Castellanos nodded approvingly. During her deployment in Afghanistan, Captain Reyes observed that enemy radar operators would ignore low-flying aircraft during certain times of day because that's when local wildlife was most active. She started timing her missions to coincide with bat feeding patterns. Bats? Lieutenant Commander Morrison asked, his eyebrows rising. Tens of thousands of them, Valentina confirmed. They emerge from caves just after sunset, creating massive clouds on radar screens that operators learn to ignore. I would position my aircraft within those clouds, matching their speed and altitude patterns. To the radar operators, I was just part of the natural background noise. The room had grown quiet again, but this time It was the silence of professionals recognizing expertise that transcended their own understanding. That's when they started calling you Ghost, Admiral Castellanos observed. That's when I realized that the best way to disappear isn't to become invisible, Valentina replied. It's to become irrelevant. The morning sun had shifted position during the extended briefing, casting new patterns of light and shadow across the briefing room. Admiral Castellanos glanced at her watch. They had been at this for over an hour, but the transformation she was witnessing made every minute worthwhile. The body language in the room had changed. Pilots who had initially avoided eye contact with Valentina were now studying her with the focused attention reserved for someone they recognized as a professional equal. Let's talk about the specific challenges of Operation Nightfall, Admiral Castellanos announced, returning attention to the tactical display. The flight path will take you through what we're calling the Dragon's Corridor, a stretch of disputed airspace where Chinese forces have been conducting increasingly aggressive intercepts. She highlighted a series of recent incidents, each marked with red indicators showing where American aircraft had been challenged, followed, or actively targeted by Chinese interceptors. Last week, a routine patrol flight was painted by fire control radar for 12 minutes. The Chinese pilots were clearly testing our response protocols, seeing how close they could push without triggering an international incident. Captain Rodriguez studied the incident reports with growing concern. Ma'am, if they're that aggressive with standard patrols, what happens when they detect a penetration attempt? That depends entirely on whether they detect it at all, Admiral Castellanos replied. Captain Reyes, walk us through your approach. Valentina moved to the display, her fingers tracing the complex flight path with the confidence of someone who had already flown it a dozen times in her mind. The key is understanding that they're not really looking for aircraft. They're looking for threats. Those are two very different things. She pointed to a series of shipping lanes that ran parallel to their intended route. Commercial air traffic follows predictable patterns in this region. Cargo flights, passenger jets, even private aircraft. The radar operators see dozens of contacts every hour that pose no military significance. So you hide among civilian traffic? Major Patterson asked. No, Valentina corrected. I become civilian traffic. My approach profile will match a delayed cargo flight from Bangkok to Manila. Same altitude, same speed, same radio signature. The only difference is that instead of carrying consumer electronics, I'll be carrying sensor packages designed to map their defensive capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Morrison leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. But what happens when they try to establish radio contact with this supposed cargo flight? Valentina's smile turned slightly predatory. They won't. The flight I'm mimicking was canceled due to mechanical problems 6 hours ago. The Chinese know this. Their intelligence services monitor commercial aviation as closely as we do. They'll see the radar signature and assume it's a delayed departure that wasn't properly logged. The elegance of the deception was beginning to dawn on the assembled pilots. This wasn't just about avoiding detection. It was about manipulating the enemy's intelligence apparatus to create false assumptions. The beauty of this approach, Admiral Castellanos added, is that it relies on the enemy's competence rather than their mistakes. The better their intelligence gathering, the more likely they are to dismiss Captain Reyes as irrelevant. What about the return flight? Captain Rodriguez asked. Once you've gathered the intelligence, how do you extract without revealing what you've discovered? Valentina's expression grew more serious. That's where things get interesting. The return flight doesn't exist. As far as anyone monitoring radar will know, Flight 847 from Bangkok developed engine trouble over the South China Sea and diverted to the nearest airfield for emergency maintenance. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. She wouldn't just be penetrating enemy airspace. She would be disappearing from it in a way that reinforced the cover story rather than exposing the mission. Admiral Castellanos moved to a new section of the tactical display, revealing a complexity of planning that extended far beyond a single pilot on a single mission. The screen showed a coordinated dance of assets positioned throughout the Pacific theater: surface ships, submarines, satellite coverage, and supporting aircraft, all synchronized to create the conditions necessary for Operation Nightfall's success. "What you're looking at," she explained, "is the most comprehensive deception operation mounted by Pacific Fleet in the past decade. Captain Reyes's mission is the tip of a very sophisticated spear." She highlighted various elements of the supporting structure: a destroyer positioned to provide electronic warfare coverage, a submarine prepared to create acoustic signatures that would mask aircraft movements. Even weather satellites had been repositioned to provide optimal cloud cover during the crucial phases of the mission. "The Chinese will be looking for signs of American military activity," Admiral Castellanos continued. "They'll find exactly what we want them to find: routine patrol patterns, scheduled maintenance operations, and nothing that suggests anything unusual is happening." Lieutenant Commander Morrison studied the coordination required. "Admiral, this level of operational security, it's not just about protecting one reconnaissance flight. What aren't you telling us?" Admiral Castellanos paused, her expression growing more grave. "Operation Nightfall is phase one of a larger intelligence-gathering effort. If Captain Reyes succeeds in mapping the Dragon's breath system without detection, we'll have a window of opportunity to understand Chinese defensive capabilities before they realize we understand them." The strategic implications were staggering. In modern warfare, the side that achieved information superiority first often determined the outcome before the first shot was fired. "Captain Reyes," Admiral Castellanos called out, "tell your fellow pilots what happens if this mission fails." Valentina's expression grew somber, the weight of responsibility settling over her like a flight suit before a dangerous mission. "If I'm detected, if the mission is compromised, the Chinese will know that we've developed countermeasures to their most advanced defensive systems. They'll accelerate their deployment timeline and modify their defensive protocols to account for techniques we've shown them." She turned to face the assembled pilots directly. "More importantly, any future operations in this theater will face defenses that have been specifically designed to counter American capabilities. The margin for error that currently exists for all of you will disappear overnight." The room had grown heavy with the understanding that this wasn't just about one pilot's career or even one successful mission. This was about maintaining the strategic balance that kept the Pacific theater stable. Major Patterson broke the silence. "Captain Reyes, what's your assessment of mission success probability?" It was a direct question that deserved a direct answer. Valentina met his gaze without flinching. "Based on the intelligence we have, the defensive systems I'll be facing, and the techniques I'll be employing, I estimate a 73% probability of complete mission success." "And the probability of mission failure with compromise?" 18%. "Which leaves 9% unaccounted for," Captain Rodriguez observed. Valentina's voice grew quieter, but no less certain. 9% probability that I don't come back at all, but the mission remains uncompromised because there's no evidence it ever happened." The silence that followed was the kind that occurs when abstract discussions of military operations suddenly become very personal and very real. Admiral Castellanos let the weight of that statistical analysis settle over the room before advancing to the final phase of the briefing. The tactical display shifted to show real-time intelligence updates, satellite imagery that had been captured just hours earlier, and weather forecasts that would affect mission execution. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone shifting to the cadence of operational command, "Operation Nightfall launches in 6 hours. Captain Reyes will be flying a modified F-35C Lightning II equipped with experimental sensor packages and electronic warfare systems that don't officially exist. The specifications appeared on screen, aircraft modifications that pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible. Enhanced stealth capabilities, adaptive radar signature manipulation, and sensor arrays that could map enemy defensive systems in real time while maintaining complete electronic silence. The aircraft itself is a prototype, Admiral Castellanos continued. It represents the convergence of three separate black budget programs that have been in development for the past 5 years. Captain Reyes isn't just the pilot for this mission. She's been the primary test pilot for the aircraft systems she'll be using. This revelation shifted the room's understanding once again. Valentina wasn't just skilled at unconventional tactics. She had been intimately involved in developing the technology that would make those tactics possible. Captain Reyes, Admiral Castellanos called out, brief your fellow pilots on the Lightning II modifications. Valentina approached the display with the confidence of someone who knew the systems better than their designers. The primary modification is something we call the Ghost Protocol, a real-time electromagnetic signature manipulation system that can alter the aircraft's radar cross-section based on environmental conditions and threat assessment. She highlighted technical diagrams that showed the aircraft's modified skin, embedded with metamaterials that could change their reflective properties on command. Instead of having a fixed stealth signature, the aircraft can actively modify its electromagnetic profile to mimic different targets: birds, weather phenomena, even other aircraft types. The system analyzes the radar environment in real time and selects the most appropriate deception signature. Lieutenant Commander Morrison leaned forward, his engineering background engaging with the technical challenge. Captain, what's the processing power required for real-time signature analysis? And how do you prevent the system from creating signatures that are more suspicious than helpful? That's where the human element becomes critical, Valentina replied. The system provides options, but the pilot makes the final decision based on tactical situation, environmental conditions, and intuitive assessment of what the enemy expects to see. Major Patterson studied the technical specifications with growing appreciation. This isn't just about flying the aircraft. You're essentially flying the electromagnetic spectrum itself. Exactly, Admiral Castellanos confirmed. Which is why this mission requires someone with both exceptional piloting skills and an intuitive understanding of electronic warfare that can't be taught in a classroom. She turned to address the assembled pilots directly. Each of you was selected for this briefing because you represent the best of naval aviation. But Operation Nightfall requires something beyond being the best at conventional operations. It requires someone who can redefine what conventional means. The room had grown quiet with a different quality of silence, not the skepticism of the morning, but the focused attention of professionals recognizing expertise that transcended their own capabilities. The mission launches at 1400 hours, Admiral Castellanos announced. Captain Reyes, you have 5 hours for final preparation and system checks. The rest of you will be monitoring the operation from the Tactical Operations Center. She paused, scanning the faces of the pilots who had witnessed this morning's transformation. When Captain Reyes returns from this mission, and she will return, I expect each of you to remember what you learned here today about the difference between assumptions and reality. As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out of the room, the atmosphere had changed completely from the morning's beginning. Where there had been casual dismissal and unspoken skepticism, there now existed something approaching reverence for a level of expertise that few of them had imagined possible. Lieutenant Commander Morrison approached Valentina as she gathered her materials from the tactical display. His weathered face carried the expression of someone reassessing everything. He thought he knew about aerial warfare. "Captain Reyes," he said quietly, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology. When I saw your name wasn't called this morning, I assumed." He trailed off, recognizing that finishing the sentence would only make things worse. Valentina accepted his handshake with the grace of someone who had navigated these conversations many times before. "You assumed what the evidence suggested, Lieutenant Commander. No apology necessary." "The hell it isn't," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades in military service. "I've been flying combat missions since before you entered the academy, and what you're describing, what you've accomplished, it's beyond anything I thought was possible." Other pilots had begun gathering around, drawn by the same professional curiosity that had transformed the morning's briefing. Major Patterson stepped forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest. "Captain, I have to ask, how long did it take you to develop these techniques? The signature morphing, the behavioral camouflage, all of it." Valentina considered the question carefully. "Major, I think I've been developing them my entire career without realizing it. Every mission taught me something about how enemies think, how they react, how they make assumptions. The formal techniques are just the codification of lessons learned in combat." Captain Rodriguez, who had remained silent during much of the briefing, finally spoke up. "Captain Reyes, I've read about some of your missions in Afghanistan. The extraction you mentioned earlier, Operation Ghost Walk. My squadron was supposed to provide backup support for that mission." Valentina turned to him with interest. "Captain Rodriguez, you were with VFA 151 at the time." "Yes, ma'am. We were orbiting at Angels 20, waiting for your call if things went south. Except you never called. We watched on Datalink as you went in alone and came out with the package, clean as a whistle. We spent the next week trying to figure out how you pulled it off." "What conclusion did you reach?" Rodriguez smiled ruefully. "That either you were reckless enough to attempt the impossible or skilled enough to make the impossible look routine. After this morning's briefing, I know which one it was." The gathering had grown to include most of the pilots who had attended the briefing. Admiral Castellano watched from across the room with satisfaction, recognizing the moment when professional barriers dissolved in favor of mutual respect. "Captain Reyes," she called out, "you have final preparations to complete. The rest of you report to the Tactical Operations Center at 13:30 hours for mission monitoring." As the pilots began dispersing, Lieutenant Commander Morrison lingered for a moment. "Captain, one more question. When you're out there alone, dealing with threats that would challenge an entire squadron, what keeps you focused?" Valentina's expression grew thoughtful, her eyes moving to the window where F-35s continued their pre-flight operations on the distant flight line. "I remember that every technique I use, every risk I take, means that pilots like you don't have to face those same risks. If I can disappear into contested airspace and return with intelligence that keeps others safe, then every moment of danger becomes worthwhile." The simplicity and sincerity of her answer silenced the room. These were combat veterans who understood sacrifice, but few had heard it articulated with such quiet conviction.